Is this true? $210,000 from one single podcast episode.
It's actually considerably more than that in direct revenue from that one podcast interview and climbing.
People would think, okay, then you must have a big audience yourself, or you must have at least a large email list.
Less than 4,000 subscribers to our email list, $1 million business for 3 years running now. And when I say $1 million, it's like highly profitable too. I don't do any paid ads. I need 100 people a year. And so I think that is a really critical mindset. The main thing I've done to grow my small but mighty email list is...
All right, Dustin, I'm fired up and I'm just going to get right into it. I mean, tell me, is this true about what we're to share here? $210,000 for your coaching business from one single podcast episode. Is that true, or am I making things up here?
It is true, except the asterisk I put on that is it's actually considerably more than that. We can talk about the distinction here, but in direct revenue from that one podcast interview, yes, 210,000 and climbing.
Okay. Yeah. And we're going to share some other numbers because I was able to do a little bit of digging and see how many views that video has gotten in the last 30 days. And it's kind of small, but you actually said you've actually already pretty much figured out there's 2 calls that are coming from those low amount of views. So that's really, really exciting. So why don't we just kick it off and let's just go over the numbers real quick. So I saw you on an interview with Nathan after I think 6 months. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was it like around 140,000 is what was at that time?
Yeah. So for full context, I was on the Nathan Barry show, spring of 2025. And within 90 days, we'd hit 100,000 in direct sales into our coaching program. When I say direct sales, people listening to that interview, following the specific call to action from that interview, booking a call with us and referencing the interview, and then purchasing our flagship program. So we hit 100,000 in right around 90 days post publishing. Within 6 months, that had grown to 140,000. And at that point, I reflected back to Nathan and said, hey, this is unique. Would you like to kind of do a case study on my podcast? So I actually had Nathan on my podcast and we broke down a little more the behind the scenes of why this works so well in his view, which is really interesting. And yeah, now we're sitting here just post a year publishing and we're at 210,000. So it's continuing to grow. And of course, there's a diminishing return over time, but there is definitely a long tail benefit to that interview and, this whole format that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah. And so are you a believer that small audiences are pretty powerful?
I am. Yes. This is definitely proof of that. But that's sort of been my MO throughout, each of the online businesses that I've had over the years.
Yeah. And I know we're also going to talk about some of the doors that have opened since being on that podcast. And the funny thing is I've known Nathan Barry as far as who he is and what he's done over the years before Kit even existed, or ConvertKit at that time. But the interesting thing is even though he has a very, very large business, he doesn't have a very, very large personal brand following, as I would think he would, right? So you would say, oh, of course you did that because you were on the Nathan Barry show. But if you look at his numbers, they're not that impressive if you're thinking like YouTube stats, like a Mr. Beast, right? Like that type of numbers. But what we have realized is those listeners, those are, listeners that you want to be in front of. So why don't you talk about that real quick? And then we're going to get into some tactics as far as like how you put this all together, how it worked, how you actually help people to do this. But let's talk about that real quick. As far as, that audience, why did that work so well?
So I'm a huge believer in quality over quantity. And I think that is increasingly important in an age of AI and what I call a trust recession that we're in now. It's really not about shouting into a crowd and hoping a few people, resonate with that message. It's really being selective about choosing an audience to be in front of, where, a very large percentage of them will actually resonate and care and about what you have to say and ultimately trust you, right? So that's sort of the big idea. But with Nathan's audience in particular, since we're focused on that as our case study, Nathan publicly says, and I was just in a room that he was in at a conference just, I guess, last month, and he repeated this and it's actually a bit controversial in the way that he's viewing this. But he has said, my podcast, The Nathan Barry Show, is not for beginners and it's not for everyone. It's for professional creators. And that's the word that he uses, right? Which is really interesting because this is his personal brand and it is definitely different, although obviously somewhat related to his role as a CEO of I think it's 50 million plus dollar software company called Kit, this email marketing software. And so I was actually in this mastermind room where Nathan was in the front of the room and people were giving him feedback, very pointed feedback about reconciling, hey, this is what Kit's mission is, but this is not what you're doing with your personal brand. He's like, yeah, it's not, because my personal brand is not Kit, and but the reason I make that distinction is, while Kit obviously is a huge business and has a well-recognized name in the professional creator space, Nathan Barry's personal brand is pretty niche, and he likes it that way, and he does that very intentionally. And you see that if you look at some of the statistics. I know you're very attuned to YouTube, and I'll let you give context to what you see with his YouTube channel, because his podcast is a video first podcast. But when I look at the podcasting platforms, it's pretty darn small. It's actually similar to the size of like my podcast, which I would consider pretty niche, and definitely I don't have the name recognition that Nathan has. So it is definitely small. I mean, maybe you could start to scratch on medium size for a podcast, but pretty small. And yeah, I think part of the power though is his strong intention to cater to a very specific type of audience, like full-time professional creators. And when you look at the people he features on his podcast, they're pretty specialized, right? And they're talking about very unique topics that only people that make a full-time living as online creators would care about. And I think that's part of the reason my topic resonated so well with that audience.
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up a great point, and I'm glad that you shared that about Nathan, about what he shared, about the way that he feels about that. Because I think so many people get fixated on like the vanity metrics, right? Like the more views we get means the more successful we'll be, and that is not the absolute truth. Now, is there some situations where that can happen? Yeah, if you're doing sponsorship deals, if you're doing like things like that. But for you and I that are more in I'll call it the high ticket space, where we're trying to make an impact, but with the right people. And that's just the path that we've chosen. It doesn't mean it's necessarily for everyone, but right. I do hear him say all the time, like you said, mid-size kind of like professional creators that are making 300,000 plus. That's about where he's like, if you're making 300 grand and then some, this is for you. If you're not, you can still listen, aspire, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily for you. So I definitely agree. Let's kind of put this into perspective. So for you right now, someone that's built, and I know you've publicly said this, you have a 7-figure company. Mm-hmm. And people would think, okay, then you must have a big audience yourself, or you must have at least a large email list, because yeah, you might not get a lot of views on YouTube. You might not get a lot of downloads on your podcast, but you must have a big email list. Let's touch on that real quick, because I think people will be shocked at the size of your email list.
As of right now, we have about 3,800 people on our email list. And when we first hit the 7-figure mark in 2024, so a couple of years back, I specifically checked, and when I say hit the 7 figures, we hit that run rate for a quarter, right? So we had a $250,000 quarter. I started getting asked, wow, like, how are you doing this? And at that point, I had like 758 subscribers. It was definitely less than 800 when we hit that mark. And of course, we've grown some since then. But yeah, like less than 4,000 subscribers to our email list, $1 million business for 3 years running now. And when I say $1 million, it's like highly profitable too, right? I don't do any paid ads. So this isn't sort of it's quote unquote $1 million business, but I spent 980,000 in ads to get it, right? This is purely what most people would call organic, right? It is earned media. It is earned attention from doing the things we're going to be teaching in this masterclass, which is showing up and basically serving, training, coaching other people's audiences as a way to gain very intentional, selective niche attention. And so my email list is extremely engaged, very high trust. The revenue per subscriber per year is approaching $300, which is very, very high on a per subscriber basis. But that's on purpose, right? I would not have those same metrics if I had a 40,000 person email list. It's not that I don't want a 40,000 person email list. It's that, for one, I don't need it. And two, it's just as I open with talking about my approach to podcast guesting, I'm very much in the quality over quantity camp. I would much rather have a high trust, in-depth relationship with a selective audience than sort of try to be everyone to everything to everyone and sort of have a broad-based, shallow following, which I think a lot of people fall into a trap thinking that that is the only way to generate substantial revenue in their business.
All right. So I need you to repeat that. So I'm hearing this clearly. What was your subscribers? And then what was the revenue? Again, approximately, I believe it's 7 figures. So give me those numbers again. And just to put it out there, it'll probably be a soundbite on this one here. So Dustin, give us the numbers on that one, because that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So our current email list is around 3,800 subscribers, and we will generate closer to 1.5 million in revenue this year with that email list. And 3 years ago, when we first crossed the 7-figure run rate in this business, we were shy of 800 email subscribers. So that's that. You can do the math and back out what you will, but it's about $300 per subscriber per year, which I'm not an email expert, but I think that's pretty good. So.
Yeah. And I think the number I want to highlight is 800 subscribers and 7 figures, because a lot of people would be like, I have to get to like 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 email subscribers. And you've proven that's not the case. All right. I know there's a question that's going to be asked, and I'm going to ask it right now. How did you grow to your first 800 subscribers? Like, what was the strategy behind that? How did you get that momentum? Because I know people are going to want to know, okay, that's great. That's a great list that you built, because obviously you proved it works. How did you find the right people?
Yeah. And I think for context too, you're hearing me use the word intentional a lot. So I had an online business that was much more mass market. It was a digital, it was in the relationship space. I had a 25,000 person email list. I had $9 courses and a $19 a month membership, right? So I've done that model. I had a physical products business, which was also pretty mass market. And we had about a 10,000 person email list. We were selling an average cart value of about $50, right? So it's sort of like that middle market. So when I got into this space 4 years ago and was leveraging a lot of the skills I had learned in other online businesses, I very purposefully set this up where I'm like, I want very high trust, high intent clients, and I'm going to charge a premium. We're going to provide a super premium experience. So I guess for context for everyone too, like a perfect year, the year I've designed, which we're on track for this year, is 100 new clients. Right. And I think that's important for people to think about, like back out, like whatever your goals are for your business and whatever types of program and value you want to deliver, like start with that. So for me, that's 100 new clients in our premium program. And with that, it grows our community and our mastermind and some other things. So what does it take to have 100 ideal fit clients? Well, not a huge number on the front end, but they have to be the right people to pull through to do that. So I just want to kind of give that context. I do understand there's other models here, but the way that we and I and now we as a small team have built this business at 7-Figure Leap is really through the things that we teach, which is relationship-based marketing, primarily podcast guesting. So the main thing I've done to grow my small but mighty email list and our sales, and about 300 clients at this point in our flagship program, is podcast guesting. So the main thing I do to drive growth is go be on other people's podcasts, get interviewed as a guest expert on my niche expertise and my stories and my experience, and from that comes clients, right? Like very highly targeted audiences and clients and email subscribers. And then, as we're going to talk about as an expanded view of this, what else comes from that are relationships and partnerships and collaborations and lots of really cool things. So that's the foundation of what we do and what I do and what we teach. If you want to think a little bit like a layer on top of podcast guesting, it would be this bigger idea of just serving other people's audiences as an expert, like our ideal clients. And I would put myself adjacent to this statement too, our ideal clients will often say the words, I'm really good at what I do. I'm just not that good at marketing. And I think similar to you, Scott, one of my passions is to empower people and say, what if you could just do the thing you do and it became your marketing, right? So for me, that is like get you in front of your target niche audiences, be a guest on someone else's platform, like a podcast, teach, coach, tell your authentic stories, and let that be the magnet to draw the right people. You're not going to get a ton of people doing that because these are people that are investing 30, 45 minutes. They're really into the topic. They like this host. They trust, this is a very like trust centric ecosystem that you're plugging into. But the people that come out of it are highly engaged and they're very aware that you're the solution that they're seeking. So it's kind of a long way to say practicing what we preach, doing podcast guesting, doing guest training like this, and this leads to speaking on stage and some other things. But the basic model is creating win-win-win relationships between me, a host, and that host's audience.
Yeah. And so if I remember your story, you started, I believe, to get into this was like through Story Brand. And when you was that like one of your first things that you went in and said, okay, I'm going to start going down this road, and then you started building from there? Or was it just directly like, I'm going to start podcasting and talking about guest podcasting?
No, it wasn't that at all. It was actually predating that. It was a consumer packaged good business that I was in. It was a meat sticks company, and so I had no conception of this model that I'm talking about now. I had never done podcast guesting at all, and we were running more of a trade show model. So we were going in person, sampling. We had a really tasty food product, right? So that's what you do. And then COVID happened, and all that got shut down, and I was like lost as a partner in this company. Like, how are we going to market this without standing toe to toe with other humans and saying, try this, And so I said, I like podcasts. I listen to them. I wonder, if this could work. So in summer 2020, I started podcast guesting to tell the story behind this brand that we had built. And people really resonated with the story, and they started ordering the product, without tasting it, and it picked up a ton of momentum. And so that's what got me into podcast guesting. What I really started to see in that experience was not only the direct response aspect, where people were ordering meat sticks from a stranger on the internet from hearing a story, but the relationship capital that came from it, right? These hosts that I met, these other guests that I started to build relationships with by doing this, led to a $500,000 purchase order from a subscription box company. It led to us getting into Walmart. It led to this like crazy stuff that was very abnormal in the industry. Most people in that industry are putting in a nickel to get out 6 cents on Facebook ads, but we weren't running that playbook. We were running a relationship-based marketing playbook. And so then people started to say, this is really different. Like, can you help me with that? And what I started to find was it does work for physical products and the thing that I did it for, but it actually worked way better for coaches, consultants, thought leaders who have an education-based business already and who have higher ticket services and products to sell. So anyway, Scott, that's the bridge over. I had no intent. I have no marketing degree. I never aspired to be a coach. I figured out a system that was working really well for us, and what I found was a unique way to apply it. And now 4.5 years later, for 4.5 years, this is all I've done is actually help people use podcast guesting as a strategic growth tool.
So I guess what I was trying to ask was, and I love that story because I think it lays a nice bed of context for like where it kind of all originated.
Yeah.
But the 800 people that you got on your list, were some of them people just from your meat business, or were they people that were interested in how you were marketing yourself to get in front of other people's audiences?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. There were a few that came over from the meat business, if you will. So there were people that were consumers of that product, but they really started to fall in love with the marketing, and they're like, just this whole like idea that this is a unique story and stories sell. And they started following me versus following the Fire Creek Snacks brand, which was the name of that company. So there's a small number, maybe less than 100, that I would say joined my email list because they knew me as the Fire Creek guy and they had heard me on podcasts talking about the Meatstick story. But to build the list, foundationally, what I did was I started, instead of pitching shows and say, hey, I want to come tell you the Fire Creek story, I would say, hey, I want to come tell you what I learned about marketing and podcast guesting as a strategy by running this Meatstick company, I want to teach your audience about what I learned. And so I started getting more on marketing shows, e-commerce type shows, entrepreneurial shows. And so my podcast guesting journey sort of been split in half between the early days when it was all the Fire Creek snacks, consumer packaged good, and then I made this pivot in 2021 where as I was sunsetting my involvement and selling my partnership from that company, I was coming over into this coaching existence. So I was starting to get one-on-one coaching engagements and decided there's something here. Maybe I should start talking about this as the primary application of what I've learned. And yeah, that's where this massive 4,000 person email list has grown, ever since. So.
Right. That's how it exploded.
Right.
Yeah. So no, I love that. And because I just know that people are going to be thinking like, it's going to take me so long, even just to get to 4,000. It's like, you don't need to get to 4,000. And I mean, going back, almost 18 years now, when I started online, I started with YouTube. That's why I'm a big believer in it. And it wasn't what it is today. And it was all sharing my story about my wife and I in the photography business and how we were basically teaching others how to, basically get started in a photography business and how to market your photography business. And we were doing that. And I only had about 500 to 600 people on that email list when I did my first product launch, which Jeff Walker was my mentor back then, back in the day. That's how I'm dating myself. So I was able to generate like $12,500 in 3 days from a product launch with a list of like 500-600 people. And back then, that was like crazy money. I was like, holy crap. Like, I think I just won the lottery. And then I was able to do it again and again. And I think our list tapped out at about 8,000. And we were able to do multiple six figures for like 6 years in a row. Yeah. And that's what allowed me to go full time and all that. So I resonate with the small audience thing. And I think even today, because you're proving it today, it still works. And it works with a high ticket offer, right, that you're selling. So it's just awesome. And I think it's inspiring for others to hear that. So let's get into it now. So why don't you walk us through tell us how you got on the Nathan Barry show first. Let's kind of go there, explain that, kind of like how it all kind of worked. Then I want you to break it down in the simplest form for someone that's listening that says, I want to be able to go ahead and try doing this for myself. Give them a roadmap. I know that you have a roadmap and I want you to share that. How's that sound?
Yeah, absolutely. So specific to the Nathan Barry show, people will probably be surprised to hear I didn't know Nathan. I didn't have a pre-existing relationship. This was not a some fraternity brother sort of like, hey, come on my show, man. That happens. Absolutely, that happens. Especially in some of the larger shows. There's a lot of either money exchanged or just relationship capital that is in play. But the shows that I focus on for myself and our clients are typically these smaller, medium, niche sort of shows. And the value exchange is legitimately the exchange of expertise, right? It is going to that host and saying, I have something of unique value to your audience that I would love to share, which could be a unique framework. It could be a unique experience. It could just be a unique story, right? It doesn't even have to be super groundbreaking in terms of the content. And so that's actually what I did. I will say I had joined a small program with Nathan that Nathan had put out at the time. He's since sunsetted. I'm a huge fan of flywheels, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about that today and how I've applied flywheels to the system we teach. But that's a Nathan thing. Nathan's very into flywheels, and I knew that, right? And I was into it, and I learned a lot from him. So I had invested a little bit basically bought a course on flywheels from Nathan. That did not give me a relationship, but what it did give me was this little hint that he made a note in a community post that said, hey, I'm going to be doing the next season of the podcast. Keep an eye out if you know anyone who would be a good guest. And I'm like, of course, I'm like, me. So I got really focused on it really quick. And so I literally filled out like a form. They put out a thing and say, hey, we're accepting new applications for guests. I filled out a form. Where I think I started to differentiate myself is the positioning, the story. I was really looking at it through a lens of what would sound really good to Nathan for this audience that I knew he was catering to, which was professional creators. And there was two options there: be coached by Nathan or come be an expert. I was like, he's not going to view me as an expert because he doesn't know me. So I said, I want to check the box, be coached by Nathan. And I talked about how I was wanting to scale from 1 to 3 million, and I had built this really niche business, and flywheels are something I think could really help me. So it wasn't like a bait and switch, because I would have been super happy to do that as the episode, but I catered to his needs and the needs of the audience first and foremost. Once I was accepted and I started working with his assistant to craft the show, I started to pivot a little bit, and it became 80% me teaching as an expert. And then the last 20% of the interview is him coaching me on how I'll scale my own business. So I think that's an important point for the audience. First thing you got to do is build a relationship, get your foot in the door. You can always be a little more strategic about the content you deliver after you get the opportunity to deliver it. But that's really how that went down. And then I got accepted, and I flew out to Boise, Idaho, to do an in-person, in-studio interview with Nathan. And as we've shared, it's been not the only kind of unicorn event in my podcast guesting career, but it's been right at the top of the list, and one of the more recent, just out of the world successes. But that's how I did it. I literally filled out the form when they said we're taking guests. I made a compelling pitch, and then I was very well prepared after I got the yes for how I wanted to drive my own version of it to suit his audience and suit my own desires for the podcast. Once I had permission to do that by getting accepted on first.
That's great. And just for context too, I think this is important. This was in person.
Yes.
So you had to fly there. You had to stay in a hotel. Take us through that real quick, because I believe it's public. Like, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure, I mean, you got to kind of foot the bill on that, correct?
Yeah, they weren't paying me to come, but it was, I knew it was going to be a good investment. And there were a few things. This is the way Nathan does the show. It's one of the reasons I admire Nathan as a business mentor, is he thinks in terms of flywheels. And so, he used to do his podcast like everyone, like show up once a week and, just do it in real time. And he decided, I want to batch this thing. And at first that was for his own desires, because he wanted to save his own time. But what they created was an experience out of it. And I knew this, was part of the deal, because I listened to his podcast and I was aware that this is how they do things. So the quick experience there is, I flew in on a Monday afternoon. Monday night, there was a group dinner with the other people being interviewed that month. So they did 4 interviews in a batch. I got to have dinner with Nathan, his marketing assistant, who I was, working with to craft the show, and some other members of the KIT team. So I would have flown into Boise for that, honestly, like just to have a dinner with this, 8-person group with other experts and Nathan and some of his team members. So that was how we started. Then got up early the next day, went into their KIT studios there in Boise, and basically hung out in the lobby for the whole morning with the other guests. And we kind of rotated into the studio with Nathan and did our interview. But just, the hour before our interview, I sat down with his marketing assistant, Kara, and we basically created, if you ever watch his show, he's got sort of this, it's a blackboard with kind of white markers. And it looks like we're creating it in real time, but there's actually a version of it that's been completely pre-crafted. So I sat there with Kara and decided what the visuals are going to be for the show. And then I went in the studio, and Nathan's extremely talented and was able to just pick it up and go. And that was it. And then after I, got to hang out in the afternoon, I basically stayed all day and then flew out on Tuesday night. So it was a one-night thing. Couple $1,000 probably for all the travel, hotel, and all that. And I'd love to do it again on the other side of 210,000 and counting. So
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good investment. And not to mention, like you said, you were able to meet there with other people, connect with other people, connect closer with Nathan, his team, like everything. Like, who knows what comes from that? And you already said, like, other doors have opened, whether it's because of that or whether it's because of just being on the show. So there's so much in putting ourselves out there. I think that's one of the things I'm doing this year, is I'm being very intentional. I love the word, about just making connections and being helpful. Like, that's it. Just serving. And you know what? I know good things will happen. They always have, and you're proof of it. So yeah, I'm excited. So awesome. All right, let's move into, how do people actually do this? How could someone else get on a podcast and potentially, the word there is potential, and we're not going to guarantee any results, but how to potentially add a couple $100,000 to their coaching business by getting on a podcast? Like, what is the framework? What is the blueprint?
Yeah, let me just share a quick visual of our framework, Scott. And as I do this, I will say the average podcast interview that our clients do, and we've had over 300 clients, is $2,000, right? So just to give people like a realistic target here, it's $2,000 per interview. And maybe after I say 210, you're like, oh, that's nothing, right? But it's like 30 minutes, right? So it's actually a pretty good hourly rate. And of course, you have to build a system to support that. And the reality is you'll have some that are, weak, they're $200. You have some that are 2,000, 20,000. But what's really exciting about this when you do it well and you do it with intention is it's not random and accidental that what I refer to as these unicorn relationships come. And so I'm going to go through like this 5-step process so the listener can go find the right shows, get on them, perform well, and make money from it. Like that, I'm going to do that. But what I want to make sure we have full context on is $2,000 per interview is direct revenue from people hearing the show, calling you up, or buying your product on your website, whatever your call to action, leads people to, and putting money in your bank account. And I think all of us would take $2,000 per 30 to 45-minute chunk, right? To show up and do the thing we already like to do, which is teach and coach. The really magical part of this is the relationship capital that gets built, which is not really in that $2,000 equation, right? So I'm going to show you the 5 steps to do this well. And it will predictably generate $2,000 an interview, which if you do one a week, will give you $100,000 a year. It's like in our program, that's our base promise. We're going to add a 6-figure marketing channel to your business by helping you get on the right podcast and show up effectively to grow your business. And that's sort of the linear, predictable growth that everyone can do with this. And I've seen it enough to say that very confidently. Where the crazy stuff happens and the hockey sticks and the 7 figures and these $200,000 one episode things, it's just because we're humans and we're dealing with other humans, and it's unpredictable in the best way possible in many cases, right? So anyway, I get excited, and I don't want people to be like, well, every time I do this, if it's not multiple 6 figures, it's a waste. Like that's not the game we're playing. The game we're playing is consistent relationships, serving first, planting seeds, and just know that some bamboo shoots are going to come out of the ground by doing this consistently. So the 5 steps, though: purpose, plan, pitch, perform, profit. The real brief explanation here, and we can zoom in on any of these if it's helpful. It's first and foremost, and this is the step that almost everyone skips, being clear on why you want to do podcast guesting in the first place. Like, what are your goals? Who are you trying to reach? What's the transformation you provide? What do people need to believe about you in order to get the result that you're looking for, like sell your coaching, for example? There are lots of reasons to do this, right? Selling books, leads for coaching, high ticket consulting, you name it. And so a lot of people, I think, say, oh, I do podcast guesting without ever actually asking themselves and answering the question clearly about why. Like, what are you trying to do? Because once we know what your goals are and who you're trying to reach, then the step that most people try to start with is plan, which is basically the research to find the right podcast. So again, our whole thing is not let's find 1,000 podcasts and maybe 3 of them will say yes and something good might happen. It's like, let's find the 10 perfect podcasts for our goals, for this season that we're in, for the relationships that we value, the places we know are going to like really work for us. And that's what we are trying to cultivate in step 2, is a very intentional, specific plan for the right podcast. Then we go to step 3, which is pitching those podcasts. And so when we pitch a podcast that we are very familiar with, that we care about, we've intentionally selected, it is in a sense a cold outreach, but it's also not, because we know so much about them. We can build relationship capital with them. And so again, it's not, I probably shouldn't use the word pitch, but it starts with P. This is not cold pitching. This is not spray and pray. This is not all the crap that you all listening to this receive in your inboxes every day. This is targeted, intentional outreach to a specific host to tell them exactly what value you want to provide their audience. So this is a kind of like my email list. This is not a 2% conversion rate, and we're just going to put a bunch out there. This is a 30 to 40% conversion rate with a much smaller subset of opportunities that we've done in step 2. So once we know why we're doing it, which shows we want to be on, and we've got a very compelling pitch to outreach to them to get them to say yes, the 4th step is perform. So after they say yes and you get the opportunity, what do you actually do on the podcast? what stories do you tell? What is the belief that you're building throughout the podcast? And most importantly, like, what is the call to action? I could have went on Nathan's show and he would have loved me, and I was really friendly and I told some cool stories, and I would have been completely forgotten. But I knew exactly what emotions I wanted to invoke, how I wanted to position myself, how I wanted to be seen. And I had a very clear, specific call to action for the audience to take, which is why this week I've had 2 people book calls with us that put "heard you on a Nathan Barry show" in the subject line. And that's because I have a clear, direct call to action. I knew exactly what I wanted people to do, which was tied back to the purpose of why I wanted to be on that show in the first place. So those first 4 steps here are all about finding the right shows, getting on them, and performing well. And then the extension of that, where this gets to me more exciting, the part that I personally get jazzed about, is how do you leverage each podcast opportunity to actually grow your business, right? So Scott, we have a 90-day program. About like first 35 days are the first 4 steps. We spend almost 2/3 of our time with our clients on the 5th step, right? But the 5th step, making money from the podcast opportunities that you have, just doesn't make sense. It doesn't work if you don't have the right foundation, right? So the foundation is important. It's also, to me, pretty kind of table stakes. It's like, this is just like the right way to do things. I'm going to show you exactly how to do it, and you follow my templates and my process. Like, this will definitely work. This 5th step becomes a little more customized. It's a little more strategic. It's based on the individual businesses that we're working with and their goals. And so it's a little more varied and nuanced, but that's the 5-step framework. And so I think most people listening to this, if you haven't done podcast guesting, the thing I would leave you with this framework is it's sequential, and don't go pitching podcasts if you don't know why you're doing it and like what your goals are, and you don't have clarity on which types of shows are going to drive results for you.
Yeah, no, I love this. And actually, I definitely want to double click on something here. So I'm a client of yours. So
Yeah.
just to let people know, I've invested in Dustin, and I relate a lot to your process, to the process that we share with our people, because I can help you create more YouTube videos. But if we don't have your clear why and who,
Yep.
then the stuff that we put in the title, the stuff we put in the video is not going to matter. So it's the upfront work. A lot of people don't want to do that. They just want to rush that because they figure, I just want to get to the action part where I'm going to actually get the result. When in reality, we're actually going to not get as good a result because we didn't spend the time. I mean, I'm a very impatient person. I love to just get to work and start rolling up my sleeves. Let's start digging the footings. Let's go. But we got to do a little bit of the surveying first, and we got to kind of do all
build
of that.
a blueprint first.
Yeah. And it's like, I totally relate with that. So anybody listening, don't skip that step. Now I know you have a resource, right, that people can go through that can kind of start going through this. Do you want to, we can link that up, but also do you have an easy link for someone to go to, or do you want me to just link it up? I can do both.
Yeah, we can link it up, but it's just, so 7-Figure Leap is my company with the number 7. So 7figureleap.com/playbook. It will go through each of these 5 steps. It's basically 1 email a day, and each day gives you an exercise to do. So if you're like, what does he mean by getting clear? The first email you're going to get the first day is a simple, we call it the before and after matrix. It's going to help you actually define and name the transformation you provide to your ideal clients. It's going to give you words that you probably never had before. Scott mentioned I'm a story brand guide. I love messaging. I love words. And I'm also an engineer by training. So I love making things simple and efficient, but also effective. And so the way this playbook is set up is, yes, day 1's purpose, day 2's plan. We're going to help you find podcasts. Day 3, we're going to write your pitch with you and give you a template for that, et cetera. So yeah, 7figureleap.com/playbook, totally free. Our whole business model, maybe you've noticed based on how the stories I've told about how we've grown our email list and things, I just love to teach and I love to give everything away. And then there's always going to be a subset of people that are like, I just want to learn from the source. I love community, and we've built an amazing community with people like Scott in it. And there's always going to be the premium buyers who want that premium experience. But if you go use that link, you can get the framework, right? You can get started on your own and make a ton of progress with this.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I agree with you. I think definitely do that. We'll link it up or go to the link. We'll put it up so you guys can easily access it. But I think it's worth doing. And here's my philosophy on it. You love to teach, right? And our good friend, John Meese, he had said, and I never forget it. He said, man, I loved being on, actually also was on Nathan's show. And he was like, I just wish I could just show up and teach. And then they create this beautiful asset, right? That I get to like share and I get to, well, part of what we're doing right now is doing what John wished that he'd had, because all you got to do is show up, teach, from your genius and basically leave. Right. And then us as, creators, but also as, this is our business model. It's like, we want to create a good package. So that way there, you can be proud of it, but then also the audience has a better experience than just a random, video that we kind of put together. But John had said that, and I immediately thought, like, that's good to know, because who doesn't love to just show up and just share your own stories? But like you said, be strategic about it. And that's one thing that you do teach in your program is like, don't just wing it. Have some stories, have a story bank, right? Like come up with things that you can show people that you're human, but also like that they can relate with. Why don't you give us a couple of tips on that right there, if you don't mind? Because I think that's a big one. Like when you show up, it's like, that's one thing, but how do you deliver? How did you get people to want to actually do work with you?
Yeah. I'd love to do that. And then maybe as we close out, something you said about content production, repurposing, prompted me to make sure we don't forget about the flywheel effect and kind of like how this works when you do it repeatedly over time. I think is really important. But to answer your question specifically, Scott, this kind of falls into the perform part of our framework. And if people get that playbook, we're going to give them the story structure that I recommend in general, right? Like everything's customizable to you, but same one I use most of the time, same one I used on Nathan. This is a little different format today because it's a workshop. So I'm not quite following the same format. But in general, I like to have three key stories, and these three stories kind of follow the typical arc of an interview, right? So an origin story. So why do you do what you do? Why do you care so darn much about this? Why are you passionate about it? That fits really naturally in the beginning of an interview when you're introducing yourself and talking about your backstory. So the origin story is where we start. The middle of the interview, when we're kind of priming ourselves into our core teaching moment, our framework, our process, our method. This one's unique, and I think this one's really powerful. I love to use what we call an authority story or like a celebrity story. And the idea here is tying what you do to someone that they already believe, right? And it's not that you've taught them or anything like that. You don't have to have a personal connection, but pointing to someone outside of yourself and saying, they do this, you know them, you think they're trustworthy. Well, that's what I'm about to teach you is my version of what they already do. So for me, for example, there's a million examples. I could say, uh, Tony Robbins. Everyone knows who Tony Robbins is, right? So if I came on today, Scott, and we got to the middle and you're like, how do you do this? Is there 5 steps? Yeah, there are. And actually, before I show you the 5 steps, there's a lot of buzz right now about Tony Robbins. He actually just went on this podcast tour. He's promoting this big summit that he's doing. And one thing I noticed about what Tony does is like square in what we teach in step 4. Let me get into the framework, right? And so like, I'm not saying I taught Tony Robbins, but I'm saying I observed that he does this too. Or I could say Donald Miller from StoryBrand. He built a whole $15 million company on telling stories. And if you go back and if you actually pay attention to what Don does, he does a ton of guest podcasting, and he also speaks on other people's stages. He does training because he's a teacher at heart, and so am I. So let me talk about these 5 steps. It's the same 5 steps you're going to see that Donald Miller uses, right? So what we're doing here is creating a story that gives external credibility to what we teach without taking credit for it. We're just pointing to other people that already do this. And as for the third story, the closing story, is a case study. Like it's the average Joe, average Jane story. And the whole idea here is just to give an example of someone else who's used your thing and got amazing results, right? Because with that, we've talked about how Dustin does it in my origin story. We talked about how Donald Miller does it. And then by closing with this, we can say, and normal people get results with this too, right? This isn't I'm not special. Donald Miller's not, we're special, but we're not special when it comes to how we do this. this works for a lot of normal people. I have 300 clients. I have everything from marriage coaches to executive coaches to hypnotists to doctors and lawyers. Like, this method, this 5-step framework absolutely works for normal people, and actually it works better for normal people than anyone, because we focus on very small niche audiences as our bread and butter. So I sort of just did it. Like, that's like bringing it home is like, this is normal, or this works for normal people. So those are the 3 stories: origin, authority, and case study. And then in front of that, I'd have a little one-liner sort of introduction to open the interview. And then, most important, if you don't do any of that, the most important thing is at the end of the interview, you have a call to action. And that call to action is clear, it's logical, it's a natural extension of what you've already been talking about. And the whole point is to bridge the people from this listening audience who are into what you had to say and want to take the next step and they're excited. Give them one very clear way to do that. And I already did it. 7figureleap.com/playbook. If this is a thing that you're interested in, that's where you go next. That was actually the exact same call to action I used on Nathan's show. So that's really the form and function of the structure, right? In a program, we coach people and do mock interviews and help them kind of do this at a world-class level. But at the basics, is telling real stories about your own experience and leading people to a call to action that is predetermined. Like, I know before I ever pitch Nathan what I'm going to tell people from his audience to do, right? And that's why we start with purpose, and then we move through the other steps sequentially.
Yeah, no, what I love what you just did, and I think people need to pause and rewind and watch that whole part again, because what you just shared is so critical, because those 3 stories, those arcs, are really what get people to believe and trust and all of that, and to get to relate, because you identified Tony Robbins, and I know Tony Robbins. I can see his face. I trust him.
If you don't believe me, go Google him. You're going to see he did like 25 podcast interviews in the first quarter of 2026, because he was supporting a launch. And I could have used James Clear. I could in my case, there's any nonfiction author you've ever heard of has done a podcast tour. Yep. So I can customize it to the audience, right? Because I could be like, or in some cases, it's the hosts themselves. It's like, hey, Scott, I know you did a podcast tour when you did your most recent New York Times bestselling book launch or whatever, and that makes a great authority story, because they already trust the host, right? And if you're like, you do this too. And and for our industry, that's totally what I would do, is tie it to an authority. It could be an actual celebrity if that makes sense, right? But in most cases, it's an authority within your niche.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so I think you guys should really, really pay attention to that, because I think that right there is a massive little nugget there that you just gave away. All right, so we're going to be landing the plane here, and what I want to do, though, before we do officially close out, is I know I've got some questions that I think that are going to be asked. Let's just rapid fire. Let's answer these real quick and give me your thoughts. All right. So what would you say, Dustin, to someone that thinks that they need to have a large audience today in today's world?
I would say you definitely don't. I'm proof of that. I have 300 clients that I have firsthand proof of that. And I think the mindset I would have is getting super clear on who your ideal client that you actually love to work with and you can drive the best results for. Think of them and just try to replicate the minimum viable number of them, right? So I have $1 million business, I've been in business for 4 years with this business. 3 of those we've had $1 million plus. And as I shared earlier, I'm at the peak of this. Like, I've maximized the design of this fulfillment model that we have. It's exactly what I want it to be. I need 100 people a year. There's 8 billion people, right? And there's, I don't know how many people, on the internet in the United States. It's like more than probably 150 million. I only need 100 people. And so I think that is a really critical mindset. Get out of the mindset, which I grew up with in the marketing world, and Scott probably did too, of this like funnel where it's like, I need massive awareness so that I can funnel down into people that maybe care, know, like, and trust, who care about what I have to say, maybe start to have some affinity for me, maybe trust me. And a couple of them are going to drop out of the bottom of the funnel and become clients. I don't operate that way anymore. It's not about mass awareness funneling down. It's about selecting in advance exactly who I want to reach, and then go see who already has those audiences and get in front of them. I want to talk to professional creators. I'm going to go to the Nathan Barry show. I want to talk to sort of early stage entrepreneurs who believe in the power of story and content, I'm gonna go be on Pat Flynn's podcast at SPI, which I've done, right? I'm being on those podcasts very intentionally because that's the audience I want to serve. And to me, that's the model. It's the best model anyway, but it's definitely the best model in the age of AI where everything's generic and everyone's top of funnel. Start at the bottom of the funnel. Don't start at the top.
Okay, love it. I got another quick one here. You just brought up AI. After doing multiple seven figures in high ticket coaching right now, what do you think about AI, and does that hurt the future of coaching?
That's a good quick hitter, man. That's the most difficult question ever. Here's how I feel about it. I feel that AI is a great tool. We use AI, we have AI tools for our clients. And I think you have to have very intentional boundaries around overstepping the bounds of human connection. Hopefully this has come through in today's workshop. I think the most valuable thing you can have as a business owner, especially in a high ticket coaching and service space, is trust. And so AI can quickly degrade your trust. It can also enhance your trust, right? And so I think viewing it as a tool is good. Where I think this comes in, the more direct answer to your question, I think the age of getting paid for stuff is over. It's probably been over for a little while, but it's people are all aware it's basically over. So you need to be in the business as a coach of transformation, and you need to do that in ways that AI won't eat, right? And so how do you have a coaching business that AI won't eat? One would be very, very niche and specific about the depth of audience that you understand, know, like, and trust. And you like go all in with this very specific group of people. That's unique, right? The delivery model, like we're very big on community-based program. And so our program's great. I think our system's amazing. But I think the real unique differentiator that AI is not going to take is our community. Like nowhere else in the world can you be around 300 people doing podcast guesting, have 40 story brand guides in the community with you, and just have the level of access that you have to me and the other alumni. And that's cool too. It's unique. So anyway, we go on and on about this, Scott, but I would say don't be fearful of AI, leverage it, use it as a tool, but you also do need to be cautious that the value exchange that you have with your clients can't be dependent on information exchange, because that's over. So
love it. All right. We're going to wind it down. Now we're going to do your close here. Where do people go to get more information? I know we already said it, but we're going to say it again. But I just want to thank you once before we do officially sign off. I would appreciate it. This masterclass was awesome. And all of the info that you shared, I think, is priceless. And I do believe that if people take action with it, it will add six figures to their business, but they have to do the work. So where can people learn more and get your framework?
Well, thank you, Scott. And sevenfigureleap.com/playbook is the place to do that. And it will lead you through the 5 steps of the framework we talked today. The other thing it will do, and we're going to leave this as an open loop. We didn't talk as much today about beyond the first podcast. We talked about like one podcast. How do you get results on one podcast? Where this becomes super magical is when you're doing this consistently and repeatedly as a system, and a flywheel effect kicks in, and there's all this really cool stuff that will happen in your life and your business when you do that well. And in that same resource, sevenfigureleap.com/playbook will not only take you through the 5 steps and give you the foundation that you need to do this well once, but it will show you and guide you through the bigger picture of what's possible when you do this as a way of doing your business, as a way of doing your marketing on a consistent, systematic basis. So yeah, I'll leave it at that, Scott. And thank you so much for having me on and let me share.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Dustin. We appreciate you. And guys, reach out to him. He's the guy if you want to learn about podcast guesting.